My name's James Law. I work at Geelong Community Correctional Services as a senior parole officer. So essentially my role is assessing prisoners for parole and then managing prisoners on their parole orders in the community. Susan Dandy is also here. She's the operations manager at Geelong CCS. So she oversees the court stream, including all the senior corrections officers, leading corrections officers and community corrections officers. What we're going to do is going to run through our presentation that we've got here. Then we're happy to take any questions that people have, or try and answer anything anybody wants to know about the way CCS operates or what our criteria are and how we work. In terms of prisoners on parole, there is now tougher criteria in terms of assessing for prisoners on parole. Some of it includes participation in treatment. So what that means is they at least need to have undergone an assessment for potential programs to reduce reoffending. So in terms of sort of ABI, ID prisoners, that would normally be undertaken by SOATS, which is a Specialised Offenders Assessment and Treatment Service. And part of that is the Disability Pathways Unit, who run programs for ID and ABI offenders. Their treatment also includes drug and alcohol as well, although that's not necessarily specific for ABI and ID. Behaviour in prison is also a focus now. So we look at prison incidents. So they've been involved in violent incidents in prison, drug-related incidents in prison, as well as their general behaviour. So we get a report back from the prisoner's case manager indicating what their behaviour's been like over their sentence. So if they engage well, do they interact well with staff? How do they present around the unit? Do they engage in unit activities and that sort of information? Management of risk in the community. So part of the assessment is we do a risk needs assessment. And then we look at what flag's on there, and then we look at how can we mitigate that if they're released into the community. So how can we mitigate drug and alcohol? How can we mitigate negative peers? How can we mitigate violent offending? What strategies can we put in place which will assist in reducing those risks, and also assist in reducing reoffending and not seeing prisoners breach and get back into the community, or go back into prison rather. The other thing that gets taken into account too, previous breaches of parole. So if they have a history of poor compliance on parole, that will certainly impact in the parole board's decision making when it comes to looking at them for parole. So if they've had 3 previous parole orders, they've breached them all, they're coming up for parole again, the parole board will take that into consideration when they're looking at releasing them again. So prisoners essentially only get released if they satisfy the above criteria, and in addition they do need to have stable and appropriate accommodation for release. So we won't release anybody to emergency accommodation on parole. So if somebody's looking, or housing workers can find 2 or 3 nights in crisis accommodation, that's not enough to satisfy the criteria for parole. It needs to be ongoing and it needs to be stable. And the reason being that unstable accommodation causes issues with compliance, causes issues with offending, and your focus becomes on where am I going to sleep tonight, not I'm under parole, I'm still under sentence, I've got these obligations to worry about. And generally the compliance drops off and guys breach and go back to prison. The second sort of set of orders we manage through CCS is community work orders, which generally relate to fines. So there's 3 separate orders. There are fine conversion orders, which is a court fine converted to community work. So at court, an offender receives a fine. The judge gives them a date by which it needs to be paid. Prior to that date, they go down to court. So I can't pay the fine, I'd like to convert it to community work. And they're issued with a fine conversion order for X amount of hours, which correlates back to the amount of the fine. There's fine default unpaid community work orders. That's where they get a fine at court and they don't pay it by the due date. That's where the sheriff gets involved. Sheriff eventually tracks them down, and then they can sign up to a community work order at that point, or a fine default unpaid community work order at that point. And there are also community work permits. They're for unpaid infringement, so your parking fines, your traffic fines, and all of those sort of fines. They also go through the sheriff, so the sheriff tracks them down at some point, and those fines are then converted into community work. Now, those fine orders, your fine conversion orders, fine defaults and community work permits, they can all be contravened or breached if the community work doesn't get completed within a stipulated time frame. And the time frame correlates back to the number of hours that you have essentially. So if you have 40 hours, you'll probably have 3 months to complete your community work. If you've got 300 hours, you'll probably have 12 months to complete it. So process would be, you show up to corrections, you're contracted to community work on these orders, you keep attending, the site lets us know you're attending, and we just basically log off your hours and you don't have any more contact with corrections. You just show up to your site each week, or whenever you're contracted to, and your hours gradually reduce until there's none remaining and your fines or your order expires at that point. Now if you don't comply and your order does get contravened, it goes back to court. Once it goes back to court, your orders can be varied or cancelled. A variation at court, we usually see the magistrate extend the expiry date to allow the community work to be completed. If the order is cancelled, your fine is then reimposed, most often with a payment plan in place. And what they also add is an imprisonment in lieu condition. What that essentially means is if you don't pay the fine, you're going to prison. You can't convert it back to community work at that point, and you can't redo another payment plan. The sheriff can be issued with an arrest warrant at that point, and you'll be serving the days in prison at that point, which once again correlates back to the dollar amount of the fine, converts back to days in prison. We also have community corrections orders, and Susan is going to speak to the community corrections orders.
Thanks, James. Hello everyone, my name is Susan Denny, Operations Manager down at Geelong CCS. I've also had 10 years of experience in case management with a number of people with ABIs, so I have quite a history. So I'll just kick off. So the purpose of a CCO is to provide a community-based sentencing option that may be used for a wide range of offending behaviours. So people come to us with a variety of offence types. So we've got violent offences, we've got driving offences, burgs, stalking, theft, family violence, fraud. So you name it, they're on orders for it. Our case management model is certainly responsive to the needs of each of the offenders. In the context of risk, and also the main objective for us is to reduce reoffending. The duration of a CCO can vary. It can vary from 3 months up to a number of years. Generally speaking though, CCOs tend to run around a 12-month mark. 12 months to 2 years. So that tends to be the general length of time for a CCO. CCOs can be used as a sentencing option in the Magistrates Court, the County Court, Supreme Court as well, and as well as the Appeals Court as well. So at each, regardless of the court, so CCS will be undertaking an assessment. The assessment, in terms of the duration of the assessments, it can take a strong 30 minutes to 45 minutes on the day if required. If we need some additional time, then we can certainly ask the magistrate or the judge for an adjournment, and that can vary in time. We can get a couple of weeks, we can get a couple of days, we can get up to six weeks. And generally, if we suspect that someone's got an ABI or that they've got some complex issues that we need further clarity on, then we'll be asking for the maximum amount of time to be able to sort of get some consults and case conferencing and to make an appropriate assessment. Okay, the abolition of suspended sentences occurred on the 1st of the 9th, 2014, and has certainly resulted in a significant increase in the use of CCOs as a sentencing option. So it certainly has jumped considerably. We've certainly noticed it in the last 12 months. There's been a huge number of these type of orders. The impact for us and also the offenders is that once an offender has is given a CCO, it generally means if the magistrate or the judge was looking at a suspended sentences, the next option would be to look at a term of imprisonment followed by a community corrections order. So what we're finding is a lot of offenders are getting a term for imprisonment, so they'll get up to 3 months longer, 6 months, and then they'll be released straight onto a CCO. This has a number of issues. It certainly impacts on accommodation. It certainly impacts on their linkages with different service providers that they had prior to going to imprisonment. So there certainly has a huge impact on case management and also the offenders and what's familiar to them. In terms of CCS, what we try to do is to contact the offender whilst they're in prison and to arrange for an induction appointment, and also to touch base with them and talk to them about the CCO, what the requirements are again, and to remind them that they've got to report within 2 days of release. A CCO has a treatment focus being drug and alcohol, mental health, medical conditions, restrictive conditions, justice plans, offence-specific programs, as well as a punitive aspect, being community work or a term for imprisonment prior to the commencing of CCO. CCO conditions, the core conditions. This is clearly explained to the offenders during the court assessment and also during their induction as well, that they must not commit a further offence, they must comply with the sentencing regulations, they must report to CCS within 2 days of commencing the order, must report to and receive visits from CCS, must report any changes in address or employment, must not leave Victoria without permission, obey all lawful instructions and directions. Supervision can also be placed on an order as well. Treatment conditions include drug and alcohol programs, mental health programs, offender behaviour programs, and medical assessments. It can also include restrictive conditions, alcohol exclusions, non-association conditions, place and area exclusions, and curfews as well. Additionally, they can include unpaid community work, justice plans, which are certainly done in consultation with CCS and also disability services. Electronic monitoring can be placed on orders for the higher courts only. And at this stage, there hasn't been a lot of CCOs or offenders that have been placed in that condition, as opposed to parole, which it's used quite frequently. Judicial monitoring is another condition that is relatively new, and that's essentially means that offenders are required to attend court on a regular basis or as directed by the magistrates or the judges. CCS provides a progress report, and the offender must attend in person and speak to the magistrate and also the judge as well. So the judge uses that often as a motivation, and also to address any issues in terms of non-compliance, and so it's used. Bonds are also a condition of the order as well. Okay, CCS staff have two main roles. Number one is the linkages. CCS staff perform a coordination role. So essentially our role is a referral role, and we're responsible for referrals and coordinating appointments, e.g. drug and alcohol SOTs, offender behaviour programs. CCS staff are required to maintain regular contact with service providers. And in this instance, it's certainly encouraged that we don't work alone, we don't work in silos. If we have someone that's coming to CCS, then our staff are strongly encouraged to make contact with the relevant agencies, the relevant case managers in the local area, and get some guidance and get some support if they're unsure about how to work with an offender. We're trained, we undertake a number of training programs in terms of how to utilise the ABI screening tool, and also how to work with people with suspected ABIs, simple language, not overwhelming them. So there's a number of strategies that case managers are are fully able to implement in terms of the case management. We're looking for a wraparound response. We're not psychologists. We're not the specialists. We want to work with you guys essentially and provide the offenders with the most appropriate case management model that's going to get them through the order. Our other role is obviously to monitor CCS staff, encourage and monitor offenders' attendance at appointments. So if they're being referred to drug and alcohol, then we want to know that they've attended that appointment. So we'll certainly be on the phone to make sure that they attended. If there was any issues in terms of non-compliance, we want to be on the phone to speak to that offender to clarify what the issue was, why they missed the appointment, and to reschedule another appointment. CCS are responsible for ensuring the court is made aware if an offender does not comply with appointments or reoffends, and initiates non-compliant steps and contravention actions if required. And certainly in relation to non-compliance, I'm sure that there are a number of myths out there in terms of when we send them back to court. We certainly don't send them back to court after one unacceptable absence, two unacceptable absence, because it's out there. I hear it all the time. We have a number of steps and number of strategies that we implement on with offenders before there's even a suggestion or a talk that we're going to be taking it back to court. And I'll certainly be able to go through some of those non-compliance steps a bit later on. Actually, no, I'm going to do it now. So in terms of the non-compliance steps, we have case planning activities. We have case conferencing, which is a prerequisite. We have case reviews, so there's an oversight by senior case managers to review files. Firstly, they're done on a regular basis. We do it at the 6-week mark, and then certainly as required from there. We have regular case management review meetings, which we present a number of offenders on a month-to-month and talk about their progress. We invite clinicians, we invite some external treatment providers, we invite a number of different service providers to these meetings to talk about what the progress is, what the issues are, what's in terms of moving forward, where to now, what do we need to do in terms of getting these people back on track so we don't end up at court. Senior cautions, we certainly provide warnings to the offenders in terms of where if they continue to accrue absences, what the consequences are. So I'm certainly, seniors and I certainly have it's also another opportunity for us to speak to the offenders, to engage them and to suss out what the issues are. Case planning, in terms of case conferencing, this is also another opportunity for us to try to identify what the barriers are and moving forward what the strategies might be. We, as a location, we work with disability services in terms of these CMRMs, so these are case management review meetings. We attend those on a monthly basis as well, and that's predominantly looking with at offenders that have ABIs or disability or disabilities, and we're really focusing on that cohort to try to identify what the best strategies are moving forward. A number of other seminars. We undertake a number of seminars. We're constantly inviting different service providers to come in to speak to community corrections and other government agencies to provide us with the most up-to-date information in services that are in the local community. Home visits, if they haven't turned up for a number of appointments, then we will book a car and we'll go looking for them. We'll go to their homes, we'll contact their emergency services, we'll do whatever we can to get these people through their orders. Other ways that we try to engage them are to go through, as I said, their emergency contacts. There might be some family members, there may be other service providers that we can contact if they've had any contact with them. Police may be another information resource for us. And in terms of the normal case management, in terms of the case management model, we certainly invite family members to come in to speak, to engage with the offender as well. So we don't do it just on a one-to-one. If there was a professional support worker that might be able to offer us some resources or some support to the offenders, then we'll certainly invite them into the case management. All right, I think that was all from the formal presentation. Was there any questions that James or I could answer from the floor?
I wonder if you can put any numbers on the most common types of breaches that you deal with, and then I wonder if it's broken down by disability group. Do you know what the most common typical kinds of breaches that clients with brain injury are doing?
On the parole stream, in terms of ABI ID parolees in Geelong, I don't think we actually have any at the moment, or identified anyway. Certainly no one with an ID that's been identified, and nobody with an ABI that's been identified. In terms of parole breaches at the moment, it's most common is probably drug use. We're seeing most of them, most breaches are related to ice use. Then non-compliance, most of the parolees are showing up, but it's dirty urines and ice use which is seeing most of them breach, and those that do breach. In terms of the corrections orders,
yeah, and the court stream would be further offending for sure, hands down. So offenders are committing further offences relatively quickly, and that initiates obviously police charges, and it goes back to court. Even though they re-offend, we would certainly engage them to maintain compliance and engagement with our service, because essentially we write the reports to the courts. So if they maintain engagement with CCS, then we're able to provide context in terms of what was going on for the offender at the time of the offences, and certainly what their progress were, what the issues were. And that has a huge weight in terms of what the magistrate can often do.
Just while I've got the mic, I'm going to go for one more. Just trying to tie many things together. Is there a clear role that you can see when you look around the room, the kinds of service providers here, like the neuropsychs, caseworkers and that kind of thing, where you would, this is your chance to say what you want from us. How can we be most helpful to work with corrections? Is there an obvious thing that could be picked up?
letting us know what you're doing with the offenders, because if it's going to mirror what's on a corrections order or what's on a parole order, then rather than us being there and trying to double up essentially or refer to another agency, essentially if we know what you guys are doing, then we can essentially, and that's going to mirror a condition on a parole order or a corrections order, then we can essentially use that to meet the conditions of their order. So I guess the other issue too is quite often getting guys to appointments, getting guys to assessments. So we don't have a capacity for outreach or a capacity to transport people to drug and alcohol appointments or programs or stuff like that. If there's a capacity to do that with any services, then that would certainly assist in terms of compliance, getting to programs and drug and alcohol. We have a capacity for SMS reminders and things like that, and can give them diaries and stuff like that. But the actual physical stuff, like actually helping them get around if they need it, if they don't have a licence and they're relying on public transport, and I know in Geelong quite often to get anywhere you've got to catch 2 buses. So if there's that capacity, that certainly makes a massive difference in terms of compliance.
And it certainly is impacted by, if someone comes to us without a neuropsych or without a diagnosed ABI, then trying to locate a service to actually provide that assistance becomes really tricky. So it's ideally we really need those services in place, because often if for us to get someone assessed from Turning Point, for example, it is a bit of a jungle to try to get them from Geelong to Melbourne, particularly when if they have a suspected ABI. Thankfully, Turning Point are good to us. They will often come to Geelong to our services and provide the assessments. Unfortunately, resources becomes an issue. So if an offender misses 3 assessment appointments, then the ability for them to come down on a 4th is often impacted it at that stage. So certainly we've done our best to try to invite a number of different services to corrections. We have drug and alcohol workers that work from corrections. As I said, we do home visits to try to engage offenders. I've had NDIS on hold for days on end to come to corrections if an offender should happen to turn up. I had to pull so many favours for that, but essentially it was terrific. They were able to provide us with that because often offenders will turn up unannounced. So we would never knock them back or tell them to come back because they're 35 minutes late. We will drop everything to see them and to do what we need to do to engage them. And if services can be as flexible as that is terrific. But we're all guided by our own resources and case management restrictions. In terms of other supports, it's just the logistics really. It's the transport, it's the communication flow. If we have a number of conditions, but we can ensure that our orders certainly fits into whatever plans are already in place. So if you have a case plan with an offender that's got a number of conditions and they've got a number of referrals, and we'll make it fit into our CCO. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to refer them on to brand new people. If who's who in the zoo, if they're already linked in with a worker and things are going nicely, then we don't want to change that. We want that continuity. Same as case management. We would like to think that we try to keep offenders with case managers as long as we can. Sometimes it's not the case, and unfortunately, case managers move on to different areas. But we certainly try to make sure that we maintain that consistency and bring in seniors to meet and greet. So the offenders know they've got a core case manager, but there's also that senior that she keeps popping into that room and showing her head. So at least if the case manager's away, that they've got that other sort of consistent person in their life. So that's.
Do you fund the neuropsych assessments?
We utilise Turning Point. As I said, we try to utilise the free services that are out there. However, we do also have if we can't do that, if we have someone that's quite complex and we've tried every attempt to get them to Turning Point, if for whatever reason it hasn't worked, yet they're engaged with that one particular neuropsych doctor that they have engaged with, then we certainly can utilise some funding that we have available to get that over the line. But it's our first protocol is the Turning Point. But we do have funds. Don't tell them I told you that, but yeah, they certainly do have the ability to fund that. Oh God, we're in trouble.
You mentioned the NDIS stuff.
Love it. Yep.
Yeah. Are you anticipating a change in how, like, people with a disability and in the justice system? Are you guys got an idea of if your roles will change or if there'll be some? I know disability justice in the Department of Human Services, it sort of goes to that group of case managers now, and they do the justice plans and stuff. With that, there's a potential that those jobs might not be around in the NDIS. Have you had any conversation? Do you know anything about whether it might be become a corrections role, or any ideas around any of that stuff? I don't know anything. Yeah. I'm just.
I haven't been advised of any sort of changes like that or becoming a corrections role, so I don't really know where it's going to go in the future.
Yeah.
It's changed considerably since in terms of funding and the way disability services are funded, and that impacts justice plans. I suppose I've got one guy currently doing a parole assessment for a guy at Port Phillip who's ID, and certainly rather than just a straight justice plan, it's connecting him with NDIS. So, and then arranging services through that. The issue with that is, though, because he's at Port Phillip, he's not in the Barwon area. So they can't actually do anything until the parole board give him a release date. Then they can start doing some planning. The issue there is, though, the release between getting a release date and getting a release can be quite short sometimes too. So quite often those supports may not be in place for release.
And utilising NDIS is terrific, but often, in my experience over the last 12 months, I've had so much trouble getting offenders to commit to the appointments for NDIS. So they've had the neuropsych assessment, and then it becomes into the planning phase. But to actually get them to engage and actually attend those appointments has become a bit of a nightmare. So we have offenders that essentially that are not funded. There's no funding, there's no planning. So what we just go old school. So we go back to disability services and we do case consults, and then we utilise the local services in the region because we just can't seem to get that phase completed. And we with the disability services in Geelong, we have a great relationship with our guys. Yes, obviously there we have a lot more input when it comes to justice plans, but even off the cuff questions or consults or assistance with the NDIS assessments, we can often get them on board to offer us with some consultations, which is terrific.
I'm interested to know what your experience is working with local mental health services. So I work for Barwon Health, and I'm a mental health clinician based at the Geelong Law Courts. And I've come from working at Sunshine Magistrates Court, where I had a really great working relationship with corrections, particularly the case managers. And it was a really mutually beneficial relationship because we would work together in the assessment of and planning treatment for offenders. And also I was able to do some capacity building type work with the case managers, because they felt that sometimes when offenders came in for their appointments and they were talking about or displaying suicidal ideation or self-harming behaviours, and case managers often felt that they weren't equipped to deal with that. So I'm wondering what the experience is like in Geelong. And our offices are side by side at the Geelong Law Courts, and I often think that we should talk more.
Absolutely.
I suppose the relationship has sort of been, non-existent in a lot of ways, in that we haven't sort of set up and worked together. We'll refer to Barwon Health when we sort of need to, or if we want somebody assessed, we'll do referrals, and then to the area mental health services to see if we suspect that they might need a diagnosis or there might be something going on that we want assessed. But no, in terms of the court liaison role and the mental health stuff down there, we don't sort of use that much, and it hasn't been used much in my experience.
But things can change, and we're certainly open to getting as much support as possible. With assessments, we can get up to 6-7 assessments a day, back to back, so it becomes logistically quite tight down in court, and for those, and usually if they come with a neuropsych report, it's a lot easier for the assessors, because essentially we're using that to guide our the conditions that we put on the conditions that we put on the assessments. But certainly more than happy to invite you for a learning development session at Geelong CCS. I might give you a call for that one, but absolutely.
Fantastic.
So thank you.
Susan. Thanks,